guys, it's Ariana. Welcome back to my channel. So for tonight's video, we're going to be reading some more scary stories. As per usual, I have my wicked candle in here, making the whole room smell like caramel apple. And I am all decked out in green today because it is Christmas time and green is my favorite color. And I don't know, I just bought this at Costco the other day and the inside of it is all fleece and I'm so cozy and so warm. And I have not worn this wig in quite a long time. As you guys can see, it's kind of tangled because it was balled up on my wig wall. So it is a little bit of a mess, but we're just going to deal with it because I wanted to wear my green wig today. So without further ado, let's jump into the spooky stories. The first story that I'm going to read is from the No Sleep section. It is from the Reddit author Lou Rat and it's titled, I explored an abandoned hospital and I think I found a patient. A few friends and I were bored one night, looking for something to do. One of our more adventurous friends said he knew a spot and that we should go check it out. Me and the others knew he was interested in exploring abandoned places, so he's in some group online where they share cool abandoned places they've found, and we expected to be dragged along to a random old skate park or something. He had coordinates for the place that he wanted us to go to, so we all chipped in to catch a cab to a gas station that was nearby. Liam stayed rather cryptic about where we were going, not saying what the place actually is, and instead just scrolling on his phone throughout the whole cab ride there. He was the only one in the group that I didn't really know, as he was a friend of a friend. When we finally got to the gas station, we realized we had to trek through a woodland to get to this abandoned place. Still, Liam didn't disclose any information about it. It was only around 9 p.m. and not very dark, so we just decided to keep on going and see what we could find. To say the woods were eerie is an understatement. I constantly felt like I was being watched from one place or another, but there's not much else to expect when walking through a forest at night. We all had fun scaring and jumping at each other for about 10 minutes that we had to walk through the woods, until the trail finally ran clear and led to a tail white building. It was obvious that the building was a hospital, or was at one point. The paint was peeling and the bricks were chipped, with ivy crawling up and covering the walls. It was mostly demolished, but there was still a structure to the building, making it look like a set from a low-budget horror film. We all took out our phones and used the flashlight to guide our way before stepping inside. Graffiti covered almost every inch of the cracked walls. Clearly, it was a common spot for people to come to. The further we walked into the building, the more wet and damp the building became. Pools of murky green water covered the floors in patches, and mud everywhere. After walking around for about 25 minutes, getting deeper and deeper into the building, we realized we had forgotten the way that we came. Each corridor stretched for ages, most rooms looking identical. It can't be that hard to get out of a rectangular building, we thought. We were at still mostly calm, knowing we can just choose a direction and keep going that way. We all decided to just keep walking straight, and that eventually we would get out. After another 10 minutes of sticking to that plan, it seemed we had made no progress, and that we were just walking further and further into this building. Our phones had no reception, and our map app wasn't getting a location due to no signal. The graffiti had mostly stopped at this point, and we could only see bright scribble every few meters now. We were all starting to panic, and everyone but Liam had an anxious expression on their face. After another 5 minutes of aimlessly walking, we stopped, thinking of where we went wrong. An argument throughout the group broke out, as we had been stuck in an abandoned hospital for about 90 minutes now, and couldn't find a way out. Halfway through the shouting match, I heard a cough, coming from what seemed to be a few meters away. We all immediately turned silent as we stared at each other in utter shock. Liam started laughing, so we just assumed it was a joke he was pulling or something stupid like that. A minute after the cough, we heard someone humming loudly. We all immediately started sprinting back the way that we came without another word. I could hear the humming becoming louder, as if it was following us, and we ran. I tried my hardest to run faster than ever, but my long, uncoordinated legs went too far forward, and I face planted right into the mud. I reached out to my buddy for help, but he just kept running. So I scrambled back onto my legs and ran in the same direction. My vision mostly blurred from the thick mud and stagnant water. After a few minutes of silently sprinting, we slowed down and slumped into a random room in the corridor. My friends were laughing while I was panting, using my hoodie to wipe the mud off of my face and arms. They all took the situation as a joke, while one of my friends, was actually genuinely scared. After catching our breaths, someone suggested we just follow the graffiti back to the entrance. Most of our phones had died at this point, and we only had one left as a flashlight with about 15% battery. After another hour or so of following the graffiti, we finally made it back to the entrance. And at this point, it was around 1 a.m. and we were done. We made it through the woods. Even a twig snapping would make us all jump. We called a cab and everyone slept over at my house, as it was the closest. No one really wanted to be alone that night. We still don't know what the humming or coughing was, but we all heard it and we knew we weren't imagining it. It's safe to say none of us has ever been back to that abandoned place since. And that's their entire story. So that's really creepy. Oh my God, I don't like that at all. That's super weird. Being in an abandoned place that you know is supposed to be empty and then hearing or seeing something that isn't supposed to be there is just super freaking creepy. So thank you so much for allowing me to read that story. And let's move on to the next one. The next one that I'm going to read is again from the no sleep section. It is from the Reddit author Evil Knievel 77, and it's titled, I Need Help. There's a woman who has been screaming outside for days and I can't get rid of her. Okay, so not really sure how to ask for it or who to ask, but I need some advice. Please, don't click off. I need your help. I need some serious help. The police can't do anything. I'm not sure how to explain it to them, let alone have them believe me. I don't even think they're coming. Even if they did, what can they do? At this point, I'm not even sure a priest could help, and I'm at my wit's end. So it's just like the title says. For the last 4 or 5 days straight, some lady has been screaming her head off outside of my house, on and off. I'm not even sure of how many days it's been. It's like it's been going on for weeks. And I'm not even sure I should call it a lady. Whoever it is not a lady. It sounds like one. For some context, I recently moved to central Oklahoma. I got a new job out here, and luckily, housing prices are a hell of a lot cheaper than the rest of the country. So I was able to rent a nice big house for very cheap. It's an 1.5-hour drive from OKC, but the nature out here is surprisingly gorgeous. I'm not sure what most people think when they hear Oklahoma, but it isn't all dust bowls and tornadoes and an old lady on the prairie. The house I rent has a huge backyard and a few neighbors. No one has come to bother me, just me, a big backyard, and my dog Checkers. There's North Canadian River out back in the distance, and miles of fields, red clay, and trees. Sure, there are a few rednecks and shotguns, but there are ways down the road. There's always possums running up over the goddamn road getting turned into roadkill all the time. And tons of raccoons getting into my trash can. Rabid, vicious bastards. But they are the least of my worries now. It started last week. It's awful hot and humid in this state, and I'm not very used to it. Usually, I have my window open when I'm in bed at night, and I like to hear the crickets and critters outdoors. The wind rustling in the trees, river flowing in the back, it all helps me sleep. So, as I'm laying there on top of my blankets, sweating my balls off, tossing and turning, I hear a noise. At first, I thought it might have been me, just something I was hearing. Have you ever been in total silence and you can swear you hear the TV on, only to enter the living room and find out it was just your mind playing tricks on you? Like that. Except it got louder. It started off really quiet, just a little noise. Then it started to increase. I couldn't even really tell what the noise was. I thought it might have just been the critters out in the woods or the river. But every 2 or 3 minutes, the sound slowly got louder and much more discernible. It was long, slow, miserable whines. Was it an ambulance? No, it couldn't be. Sirens don't last that long before having an interval of silence like that. And usually, they have regular rhythms. This was more erratic. Maybe it was a coyote, or a wolf howling, or the wind. I got up and I looked out my window into the backyard. Nothing but some street lamps and the lanterns on my lawn were glowing. The wood left a dark barrier on the horizon out into the night, and the air echoed the strange sound, and it was still getting louder. I went back to bed hoping it would go away. I closed my eyes for a bit, laying there, but it continuously got louder. I put my head underneath my pillow trying to drown it out. That seemed to work for a little while, but then my eyes shot wide open. I could hear what the noise was now, distinctly. It was a woman screaming. I sprung right up in bed. my blood running cold. I froze in place with my hands gripping my sheets. It was utterly unmistakable. It was a woman screaming bloody fucking murder. Long wails and sobs, then a short silence so she could breathe, and then a wretched air-splitting scream of anguish, like a mother who had just lost their child, or a woman being set on fire. It was absolutely harrowing. I started shaking, but I got up from my bed, and I tiptoed towards the window. I looked out again at the trees near my fence, my eyes searching about in the darkness, all the while her screams continuing. My eyes caught sight of 3 trees gently swaying in the gentle breeze of the night. Their branches shifted left and right, making me think something was moving out in the leaves, but my eyes darted to look, and I only saw gentle movements. The screaming was just awful. I took a deep breath and I went out my back door to my patio. The screaming was louder than ever. Obviously, I wasn't about to leave some poor woman in danger and in pain. I shouted out, "Do you need help?" And there was no response, just more screaming. It sounded like someone was dying, or at the very least in terrible pain. Clearly this woman couldn't hear me. I rushed back in the house and I got out my cell phone from its charger and I dialed 911. The dispatcher asked me what was wrong and I explained the strange screaming. The dispatcher asked me if I was in immediate danger and whether I could tell where the woman was. I told her no, and that I couldn't seem to figure out where she was. I then gave her my address, and I even held up the phone towards the backyard for a moment so the dispatcher could hear what I was hearing. The dispatcher said they couldn't hear anything, but they would send out an officer or 2 to investigate within 15 minutes. I thanked them and I hung up. I decided I needed to go talk to my neighbors about this. I got in my car and I made my way down the road a few blocks to my closest neighbor's house. He had a fairly large farm of about 5 acres, chickens and cows and whatnot. He was an old man, but he had a strong younger son I had met when I first got out there. Perhaps he could come and find this woman before the police got here. Perhaps they had heard the screaming too and could do something about it. I got out of my car in their driveway. The screaming could still be heard, but it was a little quieter. I got up to their door and I banged for a second and waited. No one came to the door. I rang the doorbell and I banged again. Still nothing. Great. Either no one was home or these people were dead asleep and deaf. I got back in my car and I decided to try another neighbor. This time further down the road, another farm. I got out of the car at this neighbor's house, but the screaming was a lot quieter here. In fact, you could barely hear it. I second-guessed myself for a moment. Maybe these neighbors of mine wouldn't be too happy if a stranger came up to their front porch this late asking for help. I decided to try it anyway. The woman needed help. I banged on the door, and after a few minutes, a very tired and angry-looking older man in overalls and a white t-shirt came to the front door. He asked what I needed, and I tried to explain the situation, but the guy stopped me halfway. He said he didn't care, and he pulled out a huge shotgun from behind his door. I held my hands up and I slowly backed away towards my car. I got in it and I drove off. Clearly my neighbors aren't very nice. It didn't matter anyway. I'd been gone for almost 20 minutes and the police might have already arrived. I drove straight back home, parked the car, and as soon as I turned off the engine, I could hear the screaming. Slowly stepping out of my car, it was still going. I went to my back gate and the police had not arrived. The screaming was somehow even louder. The same horrid, weeping howl, interrupted by a gasp of air and then more screaming. I couldn't take this anymore. I didn't care if the police arrived and I wasn't there or any of my neighbors were inconsiderate. This lady clearly needed help. I decided to go inside and grab a flashlight, and I called my dog to come help, who was somehow sound asleep. He lazily rolled over and wouldn't budge no matter what I did. I decided to go without him. It was strange. The screaming could easily be heard in the house, muffled only slightly by the walls. I went out again in the night air, out of my backyard gate and towards the dark woods. It was a moonless night, so besides the street lights and my back patio light, it was pitch black. I headed into the woods, using my flashlight to guide me forward into the thick wooded maze of branches and tree limbs. The scream seemed to be coming from the river. I searched and I searched. I moved my head around, trying to figure out where it was coming from. I yelled out for her, and I told her not to worry, that help was coming. I yelled to ask her where she was, but I didn't get a response. Just more screaming, more gasping, the leaves and twigs scratching my face and arms as I hurried through the woods trying to find a suitable direction to find this person. But there was no one out there. Nowhere could she be seen. I stopped for a moment, panting, trying to get an idea of where it was. With my hands on my knees, I used my other hand to cover my ears for a second. The screaming was deafening and really getting on my nerves. I got up again and I kept searching. I reached the river and there was no one. I followed the river and there was no one. I went up nearly a mile searching in all directions. No one. I decided I needed to turn back. The screaming had not gotten quieter or louder, whatever direction I went. I found my way back home, covered in sweat and my legs and arms aching. I looked around again in my backyard towards the woods. Where was she? When suddenly, I got a call on my phone. It was the police department. I answered, and it was the dispatcher. She asked me if I was all right, and I explained that I was, and I had been out in the woods searching for the woman. The dispatcher let me know that she had sent 2 officers my way about an hour ago. But because there had been a police crash on the nearby county, most units had been called to deal with it. She then let me know that they would be on their way to my house very soon. I thanked her, and I hung up, and I went back inside. I got a drink, and I took a dose of Tylenol. The screaming was beginning to give me a headache. When suddenly, I heard a knock at the door. I went up to it, and there were 2 officers on my front porch. I was overjoyed to see them. They asked me what on earth was going on. I explained how I had been in bed and how I had my window open and how it started to hear screaming around 1 a.m. I told them about how I had gone into the woods but had found nothing, despite searching for almost an hour. They listened and they took notes and sternly asked me if I was pranking them. I blanked at the suggestion. "Son, we don't hear anything," the officer said. I suddenly realized it was strangely quiet. The screaming had completely stopped. I swear, she was screaming. She was going on and on. The officers looked at each other and then back at me. "Listen, we believe you. I heard something going on when we got here, but it stopped. It's probably a bobcat or a mountain lion. They can get really loud sometimes. They often yowl to claim territory." I suppose that made sense. I don't suggest you go back into the woods alone, looking for a lady when you hear that noise. It's very dangerous. Before you know it, you could be a meal for a hungry kitty out there. So stay safe now, you hear? They turned, walked back to their cop cruiser, and drove off, leaving me utterly baffled. Was it really just a mountain lion? As if the damn thing was mocking me, as soon as the officers were out of sight, it started again. Of course, it was the same way too. Slow and low at first, then ear-splitting within 15 minutes. I put my head in my hands and I decided to try to go to bed. I went back to my room and closed the window. Although the air was humid and hot and my shirt stuck to my back, I couldn't leave it open to make the already loud noises even more insufferable. God damn it. It sounded like a woman. How the fuck was a bobcat or mountain lion making that noise? It was slowly squeezing out words, long and slow. Mountain lions don't do that. I couldn't make out what they were, but even with them drawn out, I recognized weeped vowels and consonants. She was trying to say something with all of her screaming. I flipped over onto my stomach, my pillow over my head again. I was thinking to myself how odd it was her voice wasn't raw. It went on like that all night. I must have dozed off a few times because I had dreams about a lady being killed and tortured that night. But then I woke up again in the middle of the night to the same horrible screaming. And before I knew it, my alarm went off. It was still going. The same wretched sighs and loud screams. 6 hours. 6 hours of nearly non-stop screaming. It was miserable. When I got up out of bed, I went up to my back porch in the cool morning air and finally yelled out for the lady to shut the fuck up. It was as if she didn't hear me. It stopped for a second before starting up again. I couldn't do this anymore. I just had to go to the office. I'd go even without coffee. I just needed to get out of here. I managed somehow to rush out of the house, groggy as I was, and make it to work. Thank God. The screaming faded away as I drove off. The workday was miserable. I got so busy I forgot all about the ordeal I had endured the night before. And frankly, I was so sleep deprived enough that I didn't care. Maybe it had all just been a bad dream. Maybe it was just some animal and it had finally gone away while I was away at work. But I'm sure you already know that isn't the case. I drove home that night listening to one of my favorite podcasts. I was groggy and ready to just eat and go to sleep. When I drove into my driveway, I heard it again. I'm just going to start referring to the screaming as it, now at this point. It hadn't gone away. Not for the entire time I was at work. I sighed and I called the police department once again. I complained again about the screaming, and the dispatch asked me some similar questions. I told her about how I had gone searching last night, but had found nothing. I then told her about the officer's suggestion that it was just an animal, and then I told her that there was no way. I held up the phone again. Do you hear that? Yeah, that's awfully strange, the dispatcher said. She told me she'd send out 2 officers again. I waited for almost 3 hours for them to show up. The whole while, I stayed in my living room, just trying to watch TV and drown it out. It seemed no matter how loud I made the TV, it always was somehow louder. Finally, I heard a sharp bang at the front door. I opened it, and I saw it was the police officers. I sighed a breath of relief. Please make it stop. The officers essentially did the same thing I did. They went out into the woods in the late evening sun and didn't get back until sundown. They too found nothing there, despite looking everywhere. And with the benefit of daylight, they even looked under rocks. One of the officers, annoyed with the constant screaming, finally got really angry at me and accused me of hiding a sound system somewhere, and I ended up arguing back with him. Why the fuck would I put myself in this distress? The officer said he couldn't take it anymore and went back to his cruiser. The other officer looked over at me and simply stated he didn't know what was going on. I'll call for backup and have them investigate, but I'm not going to lie to you. Our department serves 3 towns at once over here. We're swamped with duties, and this is pretty low priority. I can't guarantee anyone's going to come for a few days, and it could be a few weeks if it's really bad. Until then, although it's annoying and distressing, it doesn't seem to be harming you or your neighbors. It doesn't seem to be an immediate threat to life or property. I'm afraid you'll simply have to deal with it on your own. That was not something I wanted to hear, but I was in no position to argue. They had done what they could, leaving me with a horrible mystery to solve, and another night of it to endure. I looked up at the road as they drove off. I had so many questions. Hadn't any of my neighbors heard this going on? I went to my neighbor's house again, but before there was no answer. There was no way in hell I was going back to the other neighbor with the shotgun. And oddly enough, I found the further down the road I went, the quieter the screaming was. It seemed as if it was a me problem. I reluctantly returned home to it, greeting me with the same noise. I went into the house and I realized something was wrong. My dog didn't even greet me. I went over to where he normally slept to find him asleep. That was definitely weird. I shook him, but he wouldn't get up. And no, he wasn't dead. He was breathing, just in a deep sleep. Nevertheless, he wasn't getting up no matter how much I shook him. And it was still going on. My ears were ringing. Maybe I'd get used to it. Maybe it would go away on its own. After all the officers went, they had visited last night proved it couldn't stop, at least for a while. I sighed and I mowed with annoyance. I needed to get my dog to the vet. I lifted his little body and I moved to the car. And luck clearly wasn't on my side, because when I put the key into the ignition, it didn't start. Of fucking course. Like something out of a horror movie. I lifted my dog into the house again. I didn't know what I could do. The neighbors didn't seem to be home, and I couldn't ask for a ride, at least not without getting shot. Carrying my buddy 16 miles to the nearest vet office would be absolutely awful. Not impossible, but my dog weighs almost 100 pounds. I need a doctor myself by the end of it. Besides, the sun was beginning to go down. It was growing dark fast. Even if I did walk now, it would be pitch black, and I could get lost very easily. I laid my pupper back down and I just stroked him, listening as the screeching went on and on. I put on headphones, tried to listen to music, watch videos. It was always in the background. I don't know how, but I fell asleep to an ASMR video. I woke up the next morning and my headphones had slid off my ears, and it was still happening. I was in tears at this point. For God's sake, please make it stop. I looked at my phone and noticed it was very early morning. I was about to call my boss to let him know that I was having car troubles and call out of work, but I noticed my phone had no bars. I know. Could this be any more shitty? Never say that, because it can always get worse. My area sometimes has service blackouts. We're out in the boonies, so it isn't unheard of to have rolling blackouts, power surges, and momentary lapse of cell service. And like just about everyone else in America right now, I don't have a landline anymore. So I was basically shit out of luck. I went to turn on my lights, and nope. So there was absolutely no way to block out the screaming now. I finally cracked. Filled with fury, I ran out of the house and I screamed at the thing. Shut up, shut the fuck up! I collapsed on my knees crying. After sobbing for a little while, I got up and I went back in the house. I checked on my dog, who was still asleep. I checked my phone too, nothing. It didn't make any sense. How can a woman scream for nearly 72 hours straight? Why couldn't we find her? What was happening to my dog? And why was the basic service failing now of all times? I sat there trying to decide what I should do. Do I walk miles and miles in this hot sun to get help? And even if I did, would they even be able to help me? What about my dog? I had no idea what was wrong with him, and I had no idea how to help him. I walked up to my neighbor's house. It was a bit of a walk, but sweaty and determined, I knocked again. Son of a bitch didn't answer. I didn't care if my ass was shot at this point. It'd be preferable to being tortured by this howling. I walked yet again, setting up the humid morning air. I made it somehow to the grumpy neighbor's place. The screaming hadn't died down. It was loud, as if it was at my house. I knocked on the door and shouted for help, desperate for him to come out, but no one answered. I rattled his door, kicking it even. Nothing. Everything seemed abandoned. Their cars were still in the driveway, but they weren't home. I peeked into the window, and I didn't see anyone. No relief. I might as well return home. The screaming wasn't getting better anyway from the house. As I walked back the nearly 2-mile journey to my house, I was exhausted. It might be early October, but Oklahoma has been dealing with record high temperatures. The day slowly turned into afternoon when I got back to my house. I had never been so miserable. My ears were hurting from the screaming, and I had a headache. I was exhausted physically and emotionally, and I had very little sleep, so I was tired. I was angry, I was hopeless, and I was depressed. My skin was sticky and hot, my hands didn't feel right, and I was overstimulated, as if I was being driven mad by something I couldn't see. The night was worse, though. I had somehow managed to eat, and the sun went down early this time of year. I looked at my window, hoping I might see what was making the noise. It got so bad I actually tied pillows to my head to try to block it out. It didn't work. I'm not sure how, but probably because of the sheer exhaustion, I fell asleep, this time on my couch. I awoke to a sharp bang on my window. I gasped awake and I looked around. The screaming hadn't stopped, of course. It was somehow, if it were even possible, louder. There was a knock at the door, and I got up and I opened the door. But no one was there. Then the same knock happened on my window again. Slowly, I watched as a dark shadow fall upon the blinds. It slowly emerged to reveal the silhouette of a woman with long hair. It was all shadow, so I could make out no face features, just the general outline of some woman with long hair. Her limbs were distorted by the light outside, making her limbs look like spider legs. I watched her slowly slide by the window. Like her screams, she slowly wailed by, dragging her hands along the glass. The dark shadow passing by looked like ink, slowly spreading on white paper. I froze in shock. I watched her arms reach out the shadow of her hand and fingers touching the glass, making squeegee noises as she passed by. Her nails were sharp and impossibly long, almost like she was knitting needles for fingernails. I ran to the window and yanked the blinds up, and there was nothing there. Then I heard a bang, right on the side of my house. I turned in fright as I heard the noise. It sounded like a giant boulder had hit my house. I shakingly walked towards the front door to see what the noise was when suddenly, the loudest scream I had ever heard blasted right into my ear. The scream matched its scream as I fell to the ground, collapsing my head to my ear. When I removed it, there was blood, and the screaming wasn't stopping. There was more than one voice now, and knocking at my front door, knocking at my window. I screamed, and I'm not afraid to admit, I shit myself, quite literally. What would you have done? After about a few minutes of this utter torture, it stopped. It just stopped. I didn't know what was more horrible, the nonstop screaming, or its sudden absence. Somehow, the silence was even more torturous. I couldn't do this anymore. I still had no service or power. I checked on my dog, and he died. I couldn't stay here anymore. I couldn't let the screams come back. I don't know what caused this, but I needed to get away. I don't care how long the walk was. So I left into the pitch black night. There was no street lights, just my phone and my flashlight. It still had battery, thank God. It was, at the very least, quiet, even if it was deeply unsettling. There was no sounds of crickets, no birds, no frogs or toads, no possums jittering, no raccoons, just sound of my shoe on the pavement. Total silence. And I kept walking and walking, not even sure where I was going. It was so dark, but I had to keep following the road. I kept looking over my shoulder to make sure no cars were coming. Oklahoma has no goddamn sidewalks in many places, so it can be dangerous to walk near a road like I was. But honestly, a car would have been the best thing I could see. But no one came. And then I heard it again. Low and slow, just like the wind. I just tried to ignore it, but it grew louder and louder, and I just kept on walking. I don't know how long I walked for. I just kept trying to get further and further away from it. I was so happy to see something on the horizon, a light in the distance. I was so tired, but I got there. I don't know how, but I ran there. It was a roadside gas station. When I got there, I was shocked to see an employee working there, looking out from the door. The gas attendant was terrified. He said he had heard screaming coming up from the road. He asked me what the fuck it was. He let me into the store and was shocked to see me scared and exhausted. He heard the screaming too, and at first, he cracked a joke about it, but it got louder and louder, and I told him there was no use looking for the woman. He's just like me now, baffled and totally shocked. At this point, pretty fucking obvious I know this thing isn't a woman. I don't know what the fuck it is, but it scares the shit out of me. The only thing I can think of are the stories I've heard about La Llorona, or banshees, or maybe even sirens. The thing is, I'm not sure it's La Llorona. This thing isn't looking for its children, and if it was a banshee trying to warn me of impending doom, wouldn't something awful have happened? Wouldn't it have stopped after my dog had died? And aren't sirens beautiful and want you to come to them? This thing, it just wants to torture me, to fill your mind with madness and hopelessness until you're either suicidal or ready for it to come kill you, begging for a release. Yes, we called the police, and at this point, it seems to be given that they aren't coming. We've been waiting 4 hours. Yes, we tried to use his car. No, it won't start. I don't know what to do. I don't have any friends here that I can call. I moved here less than a month ago. My family is over 1,000 miles away. I don't know anybody who would believe my story anyway. I'm not sure I even want them to come. Why should I make them suffer this? I'm not even on a first name basis with most of the coworkers that I have. Do I just walk to the next town, miles away, and bring this curse with me to harm more people? The gas station has free Wi-Fi at least, and fresh coffee. I've been typing the story on what little battery my phone has left, hoping that maybe someone reading this can give me some advice, because I'm scared shitless and I don't know what to do. Where do I go? How do I get rid of this thing? What is this thing? The lights are flickering, and I hope this posts before the power goes out again. There was a knocking in the vents above us. The air is so fucking humid. I'm exhausted and sticky, and my head hurts. And the fucking screaming, it's getting even louder. Please, I'm begging you. Please tell me what to do. Please tell me why it's following me. And that's their whole post. Oh my God. Okay, so that is a lot to unpack. That is a fucking terrifying story. I didn't realize that they mentioned that the dog died in that story, so I'll put a trigger warning at the beginning of this video because I didn't want to read that. I had no fucking idea. I don't remember reading the story. I think I just saw like part of it and then I messaged the author and I was like, hey, can I read this? Because it's really fucking creepy. But I probably should have read the whole thing. That was a really long story. Holy crap. So that is absolutely terrifying. I don't know what that could be. Please let me know in the comments down below if you guys have any idea what that could be. I was thinking that it was like an SW or like a Wendigo, like it was something trying to like lure it out. But then when it went out, it was completely like invisible. You couldn't see it. It didn't come anywhere near him. And then when it came in the house, it like made his ears bleed and then it just disappeared and it was like a spider. What the fuck is that thing? That is so terrifying. If something was screaming outside of my house for days on end, I would have moved. The second my dog started to act funny, I would have fucking left. Like, I would have picked my dog up and I would have left. Oh my God, but I probably would have died on the way with my dog because he's fairly big and that dog was 100 pounds and I would have walked. I would have just picked him up and I would have went. That is so terrifying. I hope that is a fictional story because what the actual fuck? But that was absolutely terrifying. So this is where I'm gonna end the video because we're already at like the 40-minute mark. This is a very long video, so I need to edit this and upload this for you guys. But thank you so much for watching this video. If you guys did make it to the end of this video, leave me your favorite emoji in my comment section down below. I don't care what theme it is, just leave me an emoji down below, letting me know you guys made it all the way to the end of the video. I know I have mentioned a couple times in my community tab, but my videos are not doing very well on YouTube, and a lot of my YouTube friends are complaining about the same thing. So I don't know if YouTube changed their algorithm or what is going on with YouTube, but like likes aren't sticking, the chat isn't working very well when I'm in my premiere with you guys. The views are really, really low, like the click rate is really low. I don't know what's going on with YouTube. So if you guys can help me any way possible by sharing my videos around, sharing my channel around, liking my video, posting it anywhere that you guys will think people will be interested in it, that would very much help me. It'll help me get views, and more you guys interact with my videos, the more YouTube pushes my videos out onto the algorithm. So please, 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 please like this video, comment on this video, and share it around. But if you guys have any creepy stories that you want to share with me and you want to have me read on the channel, please feel free to message me either on Instagram or you can message my email. I will be getting to my email very quickly here, but thank you so much for watching and I will see you guys at the next video. Bye.